Hello and welcome to your practice. Today our posture for our practice is going to be downward facing dog, or in Sanskrit, Adho Mukha Svanasana. To begin, I think it's important to warm up the feet and the ankles. So come to a kneeling position and then just go ahead and tuck your toes under like this. And if that feels like a little too much, you can always untuck one foot and do this one at a time. Just taking a few breaths on one side and a few breaths on the other. Another way that you can take a little pressure off if your feet feel really tight and tense is by putting your hands on blocks and just lightly pressing in, giving yourself more points of contact. Sometimes the little toes stay rounded in. So if that's happening, use your fingers and pull your little toes out as well so that they come along for the stretch. So we'll just give this some time. We've really got to make sure that the ankles and the toes are mobilized because, of course, in downward facing dog, we will be releasing our heels towards the floor. This might be really challenging in and of itself because a lot of times our feet are crammed into a rigid shape in very overly supportive shoes. So if this is feeling like you're trying to stretch a brick instead of a foot, try to breathe through it, and you can adjust the amount of weight you have on your feet. You could even take some into your hands if you need. So we'll just take one more breath here. And then when you're ready, shift forward a little bit and untuck one foot and then the other. Ooh, sometimes you feel the stretch more when you're releasing out of it, even than when you're in it. So now we'll make our way into all fours, placing our knees right directly underneath the hips and the hands underneath the shoulders. And for our posture today, it's important to bring some awareness to the alignment of the hands and the fingers because they're going to be part of our base of support in downward facing dog. So really feel into your finger pads here and into the heels of your hands. Imagine that you've got a little P underneath the palm of each hand. So instead of having a lot of extra wrist pressure and lifted fingers or light fingers, you've actually got pressure in each finger pad, like you're trying to stamp your fingerprints on your mat, and also in the heel of your hand. Okay, it's not clawing the ground. It's not the tops of your fingers, but you're pressing into that space behind each top knuckle. And I like to have my index fingers pointing forward. That feels comfortable on my hands, my wrists, and my shoulders. So once you've connected to your hand placement, take that same awareness with you, and we're going to come into puppy posture, which is really just downward facing dog, but from the knees instead of the higher position. So starting in this all fours, walk one arm out about as far as you can reach, and then bring the other hand along. And the hands will be shoulder width distance apart. And you're going to keep all of that good awareness of your finger pads and the heels of your hands here. Then start to hinge forward from your hips, bringing your torso down and lowering your head right between your arms. Now this requires some mobility in the shoulders. So if you don't have that much shoulder flexion available, you could be up a little bit higher with your head and your torso. Some of you might have the opposite problem. You have a ton of mobility in your shoulders or maybe your lower back and not as much stability. So it looks something like this real swayed lower back, the arms hyperextending. If that's you, pull up a little bit and just find a little more support through your engagement of your belly and strengthen your arms to keep from just melting down to the ground. And this can be a really nice challenge in and of itself, really gets us ready, building strong habits for downward facing dog. When you've held for a little while, you feel like you've had enough, walk your hands back to the space right underneath your shoulders and just see how that feels. One of the most common questions or confusions around downward facing dog that people run into is the spacing. And oftentimes a student will ask me how far their hands should be away from their feet. And so I see downward facing dogs like this that are very small and short stance. And then downward facing dogs like this that are really, really long and difficult to hold. Now, I can't just say, oh, your hand should be 3 feet or 4 feet from your feet, because we're all different sizes. We're all different heights. So there's got to be a way to figure out, at least generally, how to find your perfect fit in downward facing dog. And there are a couple of different techniques that I like to use to figure out where your hands and your feet should be. And the first one is to come right from your child's posture to your downward facing dog. So let's lower into child's posture now. Sitting back so that your tailbone rests as close to your heels as possible and your arms are outstretched. Sometimes we take a more relaxed child's posture and we let our elbows and forearms fall down on the floor, which feels really wonderful. But for this technique, it's important to be in extended child's posture with your arms outstretched. Make sure that your shoulders aren't creeping up around the ears. We don't want to have elevated shoulders, but rather pull them down away from the ears. And then make sure that your feet are hip width distance apart. So if you usually bring your big toes together in child's posture, bring them apart. We're trying to set everything in place, all wheels in motion, so that we can literally just tuck and lift, and we're already in downward facing dog. So here we are in this very active child's posture, feet in line with the knees, in line with the hips, arms strong and outstretched, fingers really pressing in at the pads. And we're simply going to tuck the toes. Your torso might shift forward a little bit, but your hands don't move. Your feet don't change placement on the mat. And then take a deep breath to prepare. And then exhale and pull back. You can imagine that someone's pulling your belt loops, pulling you back. And just see how that feels. You might go, oh my goodness, that's different positioning than I'm used to. And perhaps it will take some getting used to, some strengthening or some flexibility training to get comfortable in that fit. And of course, there can be a little bit of give and take, but generally that works, coming from child's posture. A few things can change it. Of course, if you are unable to sit all the way down on your heels and your child's posture looks something like this, when you tuck your toes and pull back, it's going to be a longer stance. So this is a little bit too big It's like a baggy downward facing dog for me. So if you find that you don't have the ability to release and sit down on your heels, that's okay. That's totally okay. But you're going to have to do a little bit of adjustment and just move your hands back a little. So the child's pose transition doesn't work exactly for you if you can't sit all the way down, but you can easily adjust. If you're here and your hands are coming out, just move them back a few inches. You'll tuck, and that should put you pretty much in your distance. So let's just come in and out a few times. Child's posture, tuck the toes, pull back. Take a breath. Lower your knees, untuck your toes, and settle back to child's. We'll tuck our toes, pull back. Don't forget to press into all 10 finger pads. Take a breath. Lower the knees, untuck the toes, and settle back. And we'll do that one more time. Tuck the toes, pull back, take a breath. Now, if your heels aren't resting down on the floor or even anywhere near it, that is okay. Some people start way up here in their downward facing dog, and over time, your ankles will gain mobility. Another thing I should mention is that your knees might be a little bent. That's wonderful too. You don't have to have straight legs in downward facing dog. In fact, it would be probably more valuable to have a little bend in the knees and lots of length in your spine than to be super concerned about straight legs and have some sort of rounding going on in your back to maintain it. So do what you need here with your knees. You can bend them. When you're ready, lower down and press back to child's posture. All right. So that's one of the fit tests or the ways that you can really customize your downward facing dog to fit your body. And while I talk about the next one, I'll just do a little wrist TLC. Interlacing the hands and drawing some figure eights with your wrists and then going the other way. The other fit test that we can do is to use plank and shift from plank to downward facing dog. That's another really great way. So when you're ready, bring your hands to the ground and start to step back into your plank posture. Then take a deep breath. And then again, imagine that someone's pulling your belt loops and you'll press right on back into your downward facing dog. Shift forward again and pull back. Do one more. Shift forward and pull back. And now let's add that child's posture in there. So instead of shifting to plank, now lower your knees, untuck your toes, and press back to extended child's. Tuck your toes, lift to downward facing dog, and then shift to your plank. Pull back, lower your knees, untuck your feet, settling into child's posture, and then tuck your toes, lift back to downward facing dog. and shift to plank. Shift back to downward facing dog. Lower the knees. Untuck the toes. And rest in child's posture. So as you can see during that transitioning between those three postures, child's posture, downward facing dog, and plank, we never really have to move around with our hands. So a lot of times I'll see people coming in, maybe they didn't set up their elbows are bent or something in their child's posture. So they come into their downward dog and they're feeling too short stance. So they'll do a little dance around and move until they find their downward facing dog. And then they'll shift through the plank pose and go, oh, I'm still not where I want to be. So they'll move back even more and find plank. But maybe their hands are a little far forward, not right under the shoulders. And then they go to pull back to down dog. They feel too long and they're walking forward again. Of course, that's natural, and that's going to happen if you're new in your practice and just building the awareness of how your body fits in all of these positions. But I promise you over time, and I've seen this in hundreds and hundreds of students, if you practice these transitions and you get your body into these shapes, you will be able to shift between these three postures without moving your hands and without changing the position of your feet on the mat, just tucking and untucking the toes. So let's go through it one more time as we finish our downward facing dog practice for today. We'll start in child's posture with long arms, the hands set. And then we'll tuck our toes and pull back to downward facing dog. Shift forward to plank. This time, let's pull right back to downward facing dog. And we'll do that 2 more times, shifting forward to plank. And back to downward facing dog. And forward to plank. And then this time, let's go right from plank. Lower the knees, untuck the toes, and press back to child's posture. Let's shift forward this time to a kneeling plank. And tuck the toes and pull back to downward facing dog. Shift forward to plank. Lower the knees. Untuck the toes and press back to child's. Shift forward to kneeling plank. Tuck the toes. Pull back to downward facing dog. Shift forward to plank. Lower the knees. Untuck the toes. And rest. So hopefully those transitions and those fit tests helped you to feel a little bit more comfortable and knowledgeable about your body's alignment in downward facing dog. This is, of course, a posture that you are going to see in a lot of classes, a lot of times. So it's a good one to familiarize yourself with and to really build into your muscle memory so that it doesn't feel stressful or overwhelming to come into it. And like I said, if you practice these steps and practice these transitions and really figure out what makes your hands feel supported on the ground and what makes your shoulders and your core feel stable in this posture, you will start to really befriend this posture. It's one of my favorite stretches to be in the morning or at the end of the day. It's really nice inversion. It's got so many benefits and it just lengthens the whole body. So enjoy your downward facing dog. Keep practicing now, or just give yourself a big pat on the back for joining in today. I appreciate you joining me, and whether you are off to a great night or a beautiful day, I hope that it is a wonderful one, and I will see you for more practice next time. Namaste.